2.2 has been out for only just over a week, and people have already started to create some of the most terrifying and some of the most amazing levels you've ever seen. And within the endless possibilities of 2.2, I wanted to give 101 ideas as either ideas you could copy off of, just do straight verbatim, or use as a launching point for your own ideas. This video has 61 normal classic mode ideas and then 40 platformer mode ideas. If you enjoyed today's video, please remember to like and subscribe. It always helps out the channel a ton and you'll see more videos like this. We are also super close to 20,000 subscribers, so help would really be appreciated right now. First up is probably one that we've all seen coming, Dash V2, and I want to expand more on this to give you some more ideas as opposed to just, hey, look at this level that RobTop released and make another version of it. A lot of people have complained that the level's either too easy or that the level's too short, which are things that you can, change in your own version of the level, which will be made easier with additions to the editor like the song trigger. You could also place the coins in better areas, stuff like that. Although there is one idea that kind of changes Dash so much that it's sort of its own idea, which is to lobotomize Dash. For those who don't know, the term lobotomize now basically means to make a level kind of like a shitpost, basically. Like, it's just goofy, random stuff, all of the things that you can think of that are just breaking the game in the 2.2 editor. There are some of those silly ideas in this video. The next few ideas are updating the RobTop levels to the current 2.2 update in terms of aesthetics and maybe a little bit in terms of gameplay, like you could replace some ship sections that don't play very well with Swingcopter, for example. In terms of more specific ideas, for the 1.0 levels, obviously they're going to have a lot of decoration changes, but perhaps you could, again, change one of the game modes from like ball to spider, or from ship to Swingcopter, and sort of edit the structuring to make that more playable, as well as adding camera and shader effects to make things more refreshing. Sort of think the levels that were released towards the beginning of 2.1, where it was just the name of the level and then the year it was recreated in. But as the levels get more recent, I think you have more options in terms of what you could alter in the level to make it more refreshing from a 2.2 editor standpoint. Next idea is to make a random trigger level mix. So what that means is you would use the random trigger to pick a section from a level that you are putting in this level mix level. For example, let's say the level starts out with the first cube of Cataclysm, and then there's a random trigger dictating if it either goes to a section from Deadlocked or, I don't know, 9 Circles. Obviously that's a more extreme example because all three of those levels are completely different than each other, but some sort of randomized gameplay as a challenge for the player could be kind of interesting, especially if they're practicing sight reading, or if all the levels have the same feature or like a common trait. For example, it's a 9 Circles level mix, then it could be a good way of practicing 9 Circles related, and gameplay associated with those levels. Another idea that's kind of like this, that's sort of just a fun challenge for yourself and probably not something that you would be able to upload, would be a random trigger at the beginning of the level that sends you to a random RobTop level. Next up is a Swingcopter only level, where the level is, well, obviously, only using the Swingcopter game mode. There are still a lot of things that you can do to make the level interesting and fresh throughout its entire runtime, like making it free mode, dual Swingcopter, mini Swingcopter, and different speeds, as well as the arrow trigger, camera controls, all of that. Basically, this idea would force you to sort of focus in on different aspects of the 2.2 update, sort of giving yourself a one limit so that it's easier to think of ideas to keep the level fresh. Okay, so this next one's kind of wacky, but bear with me on this one. The next idea is basically Inception. So if you haven't seen the movie, the idea behind this level would be that the level folds in on itself using an effect. The point I'm trying to get across with this idea is just a super trippy, mind-bending level that sort of uses effects to make levels seem more interesting that doesn't necessarily directly affect the gameplay. Basically just the area trigger, but on steroids. And for the entire level. My next idea is a level that simply gets more and more distorted with one shader effect as you go through the level. For example, the level gets more and more pixelated until by the end of the level you can barely see what you're doing. However, to make this, actually playable, let's say the actual gameplay gets easier and easier, so it feels somewhat like it's being compensated and not a huge pain to play through. Another idea would be to have the random trigger control decoration. So for example, let's say in one outcome it's red and purple, and the other outcome it's like blue and green or something, I don't know. Or maybe it could just change the designs, or maybe it could change the entire theme depending on how much you want the level to be controlled by the random trigger. but this is a way to make it less annoying and not something you have to deal with in a gameplay sense as the player. Next up is a dual swing copter challenge. This is kind of the one piece of swing copter that we couldn't have already sort of mimicked in 2.1. Like, yeah, we had the janky sort of 2.1 approximate swing copter setup that you could also have be mini in terms of, you know, the dual ball that we saw in a bunch of levels. But we could never mimic a dual swing copter because it took a dual ball game mode in order to mimic the original swing copter. So I think this would make for a fun challenge because it isn't something that you could have possibly really practiced as much before. Next up is a level revolving around one large structure. For example, let's say you start at the beginning, or the center, I should say, of a spiral, and you use the arrow trigger to make the gameplay go along the edge of the spiral as you get further and further from the center until you get to the edge or something. The next couple ideas both have to do with the time warp trigger, so both of these would just be more experimental ideas to play around with. They're sort of two sides of the same coin. One of them would be to time warp easy levels to be faster, so that it's more of a challenge. Like, for example, you could do Stereo Madness at 2x speed, or make harder levels a bit slower. Basically speed hack, but it's in the vanilla game and it's legit. The next idea I have is something that technically you could do in 2.1, but I think it's a lot easier to do in 2.2, which is basically the idea where the level starts with one pathway and every once in a while it splits into two and it just keeps splitting, sort of like a Hydra, which is very much a memory level. But I think it'd be really interesting to see something of that nature either in the regular game or in platformer. The next idea is to make fan-made game modes that could come in a future update like 2.3 in 2.2. I think this is made a lot easier with a lot of options that you have in the 2.2 editor, and it's something that the community has been doing for forever. I mean, the UFO, Wave, and Swingcopter were all originally janky, sort of obscure things that you could do in the editor to make a sort of proxy new game mode that was later included in the main game, so maybe the next game mode added in 2.3 or beyond will have come from another fan creation. Speaking of fan-made creations, the next idea is to make a fan-made version of 2.2's Explorers, because we won't be getting the real level for quite some time. And now it would be much easier to do so because, well, we have open access to the 2.2 editor. On the flip side of that, you could also make a fan-made version of Firebird. Now again, much easier because you don't need a GDPS for it, you just need the 2.2 editor, which is in the main game now. Because we're never going to get that, but it's a nice song and there's a lot of really interesting ideas already out there for some parts of the song. You know, GD 2.2 levels that were made before 2.2 released in like the private server. That could also be super interesting and sort of an early 2.2 project that you could look back on for inspiration. The next idea I have is to take a top demon and then update it to look like a 2.2 level and then probably nerf it because barring if you are Zoink or Cursed or something, you probably aren't going to be able to beat a top 10. But it would be really interesting to recreate something like Sakupin Circles or Slaughterhouse with a 2.2 style. Basically think of the trend of making recent Top 1 Extreme Demons 1.9 style, circa 2022, and apply it to 2.2. The next idea I'm pretty sure has already been done, which is insane because we're only like a week in, but you could try making a song out of sound effects because you can play with the pitch and the speed, so you could use one of those as a note for a melody, which I think might sound good given the right sound effect. Maybe it turns out a little goofy, but then you could just make it a lobotomy level and then it's funny, so whatever. No harm, no foul. Speaking of lobotomy levels, yes, we're getting to that section of the video. If you don't think you're going to do well in the editor, you just want to make stupid stuff because you don't want to make a real level that actually tries to get rated, here are some ideas for you that mostly revolve around lobotomy levels, which, again, as I explained previously, are just stupid random stuff being thrown at the player for no reason. First off, you could make lobotomy meme versions of list levels, like Avernus or something. I mean, Avernus is already lobotomized, but you get the idea. Some other ideas of levels to just sort of absolutely destroy and make into a complete meme are God Eater, Bloodbath, Wasureta, Buff This, Change of Scene, White Space, and most of all, something that I think would probably be the funniest possible creation, Hungry Humphrey. I would be impressed if anyone remembered that level, but just look it up on the GD servers. It is already so incredibly funny. I would really love to see this level just turned into like a random mess of camera effects and the normal face or something, along with other difficulty faces or something really stupid. For a bit, let's go back to more serious ideas. First up, we have a tour of a building or a tower, perhaps two towers, where the entire level takes place within one structure. Kind of like the idea I mentioned earlier about the spiral going out to the edge, but it's confined to a realistic world object like a skyscraper. This is also an idea that works pretty well in platformer. The next couple ideas are to update map pack levels or gauntlet levels respectively. I included them separately because they kind of entail different things because map pack levels are a lot older than most of the gauntlet levels. Not only would you update decoration, but in the case of map pack levels especially, updating the gameplay to not be freaking insufferable would be really interesting. But if you were looking to update a level, these are probably some good launching points because a lot of the gauntlet and map pack levels are levels that people already are familiar with. The next idea is to recreate the planet mod within this new update and make an entire functioning level within that planet mod effect. It doesn't necessarily have to be planet mod, but just something of that nature to sort of get the wheel spinning. I mostly say this because I'm really excited to see what effects can be created for effect levels in this update. The next two ideas are sort of two sides of the same coin. The first one is to have the player control a plane throughout the entire level, sort of avoiding buildings or clouds or something like that, which is made possible by free fly mode, as well as the other idea being essentially the same thing, but it's space flight. So you're piloting like a starship that's constantly accelerating, going around asteroids or planets or something. I don't know, I think these would be really interesting minigames, also ideas that would work in platformer. Next up is make an auto level in 2.2 with only the focus being on cool effects. The whole difficulty of an auto level has just entirely been ignored for years, to the point where 2 stars are basically auto now, and having a level that is fully focused on effects in a way that really you probably wouldn't be able to play in if you actually had any gameplay that you needed to focus on, it seems like it could all make really interesting ideas. Next up is to make a level with a new custom orb. Honestly, I think this would be a really good investment because if the orb is interesting enough, RobTop could add it into 2.3. I mean, that is what he did with the spider orb in 2.2, which has kind of become a central feature of the update, which honestly I think is a really cool idea, and one with a lot of potential behind it. Next up is a glitched or distorted version of a RobTop level, sort of think like Lost Locked, but with 2.2 effects, pretty self-explanatory. Speaking of distortion, another idea is to have a level that has certain objects that instead of killing you, just distort your screen more and more. For example, yes, you die when you hit spikes, but there are certain objects maybe flying around in a ship section that if you run into, actually make your screen a bit more pixelated, so the more of them that you hit throughout the level, the harder and harder it is to see. Next up is have the entire level be visible from start to finish. Basically, the camera would be so incredibly zoomed out that you can see the beginning of the level and the end of the level and everything in between sort of compacted into the entire screen. Honestly, I would like to see how long a level could go in this fashion. If anything, this is more of a creating challenge than a playing challenge. And lastly, for normal mode ideas, I have just lobotomize your own original levels, or in other words, make your own stupid shitposty levels, and then send me the IDs on Discord. My Discord is in the description. Or send me your takes on any of the previous lobotomy-related ideas that I mentioned before, because I'm going to go over a bunch of those on stream. It's going to be a blast. I'll probably stream it in a few days, so make sure to make those relatively quickly if you want to see them in the stream or in the stream highlights video that'll come out of that stream. And then just send them to my Discord, once again, that's in the description. In terms of platformer ideas, a lot of them are sort of recreating original games, so I've sprinkled some of those for inspiration throughout the whole list here. First up, we have recreating Minecraft, which I think is really self-explanatory, but another idea would be to more specifically recreate the Ender Dragon boss fight within Geometry Dash, which I think would be quite interesting. Another idea is to make a map of the world in-game that you could travel among. So let's say you have to visit like 10 or 11 countries to complete the level, or something sort of that nature. You can also make a sort of escape room in platformer, which I think would be especially interesting because we haven't really been able to fully make good escape rooms in the game yet. Another maybe pretty similar idea would be to have a trivia level, where you have to pick the right path and the right path has the right answer. For example, one of the questions could be, should you subscribe to Wavix? And then if you click yes, then you move on to the next question. If you click no, you get a crash trigger. Another idea is to combine entire platformer levels. There isn't really a standard length yet for how long it should take to play a platformer level. It's sort of its own length because they could be anywhere from about a minute in playtime to like honestly an entire hour if it's an entire game within one level. And it's not all a one-time attempt because there are checkpoints within the level. So if there is an entire series of platformer levels that are all relatively short, you could just combine them to have them run one after the other within the same level. Another idea would be to make platformer versions of RobTop levels. There will obviously have to be some adjustments that you need to make them playable, but I think it would be really interesting to play all of those levels in platformer mode. In a very similar note, you could recreate or remake the Cursed Thorn boss fight. A lot of people have said that the Cursed Thorn boss fight is way too hard compared to the rest of the level, and then there are some people who have said, yeah, honestly, it's not that much of a difficulty increase, and then you ask them what their hardest is, and it's like literally Acheron. On the subject of boss fights, the next few ideas are boss fights with all the shopkeepers. So first up would be the boss fight with Scratch. You could include some dialogue about Rub in there or something. Another idea would just be the original shopkeeper, but at some point he turns into Zilgaroth, that whole Easter egg thing, and it becomes a lot more difficult to deal with him. And then of course there's Potbor and the diamond shopkeeper, who I forgot the name of, as well as the mechanic who could maybe mess with your ship or something since he sells ship exhausts. Moving away from that, another idea would be to make an impossible platformer level. Not impossible in the sense that it's completely physically impossible, but more so along the lines of how the ILL has impossible levels that are technically humanly possible, but realistically, no one's ever going to beat them. I think taking that idea and applying it to platformer levels would be really, really interesting. The next idea is a platformer level with no gravity. Perhaps you could set this up with the arrow trigger or with camera controls or something of that nature, but essentially having a level where you are in a void and there is no gravity, like as if you were in space or something, would be, I think, really, really interesting. Maybe it would be more of a janky setup, but I think that with the addition of platformer mode, something of this nature in the game is a real possibility. Speaking of space stuff, I had to include my favorite movie in here, Interstellar. Hear me out on this one. It would basically revolve with touch trigger time warp, where the closer you get to the black hole, the more time distorts within the level. Perhaps after a certain number of seconds in the level, you just automatically die, so you can't spend too much time near the black hole, but you need to for coins or collectibles or something. Again, a far out there idea, no pun intended, but something at least to think about, at the very least for inspiration. Next up are levels where the player is Batman or where the player is Spider-Man, in the sense that the gameplay mechanics sort of reflect how those characters move. So like there's a button to like press a web slinger or something, and then you can swing around the city and, I don't know, collect coins or something. I feel like this would kind of feel like recreating a game within platformer mode because it's revolving around a pre-established franchise, but this time it's around movies or, I guess, comics. Speaking of games to recreate in GD, outside of video games, you could recreate card games within the editor as well. I'm not entirely sure how multiplayer will work in 2.21, but for right now you could recreate something like Solitaire. And Sputniks, if you're watching this, I challenge you to make chess.com within Geometry Dash. I want to be able to play chess against an AI in Geometry Dash. Okay, so the next few ideas are pretty much just set in different settings that you would think of in the normal world, but applied into GD. First up, you could do an open world map, like a city or a town or something, where you're collecting different things, or maybe there's some sort of plot line behind it. For inspiration, Subwoofer already made a level that is taking place in like a Wild West setting. You could also do a heist-themed level, or a level where you're sort of sieging a castle, or a level that takes place during a battle in a war. Or you could make horror platformer levels that are sort of similar to levels like Collab Level, or levels that are similar to what Devin 2003 is sort of known for. Another idea would be sort of a, not necessarily recreation, but reimagining of Limbo, but in a platformer mode setting, where maybe you still have the keys that are alternating and some maze stuff, but it's platformer mode. I think there's a lot of potential for memory levels within platformer mode. Next up is a boss fight with every difficulty face in order of how difficult that difficulty is. This is the closest thing you can get to something that's both a lobotomy level and a normal level that could actually get rated. The next couple ideas are to recreate a FNAF game, or more specifically recreate Security Breach, which would work much differently considering that's open world. You could also make an underwater level that has not zero gravity, but it might work differently, as well as just recreating the Titan submarine. I'm going to hell for that one. You could make a time-traveling level where if you go into a machine, it spits you out in a 1.0 version of the level or something like that. You could mash famous levels together in a platformer where you can explore different levels that you aren't otherwise able to because they're too difficult. You could recreate Flappy Bird, you could recreate Crossy Road, and you could also lobotomize tower levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. And most importantly, you can make platformer lobotomy levels. And send me the IDs on Discord. So yeah, that's 101 level ideas for 2.2. It's sort of all over the place, but some of these ideas are more so just made to get sort of a launching point for inspiration, and less so are serious level ideas that take a long time to make. Obviously some of these are, like making a interstellar themed level that has complex time warp mechanics is going to take a lot longer and actually could be a real level compared to like Lobotomy boss fight number 5. All in all, I tried to include all kinds of ideas within this video. If you did enjoy, please remember to like and subscribe, helps out the channel a ton, and we are so close to 20,000 subscribers, like it's insane. And yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.